What can SAP data really tell you about your crop? That's what we're going to discuss in this episode of Blueprint to Yield. Welcome back to this episode of Blueprint to Yield. I'm sitting here with Clint Frese, Luke Holst from Calibrated Agronomy, and I'm Mike Evans. And today we're talking about what SAP data can do for your crop. Clint, Luke, we started SAP, 2-3 years ago? We started kind of exploring it. Now we're kind of full. It's really our management practice. Being proactive versus reactive is two different things, and SAP allows us to be proactive.
Yeah, and I mean, collectively, I think we've all learned a ton from tissue, and it's been great, but it's something that we pulled data from 2019 to make decisions for 2020 as a whole. So SAP allows us to, especially on new farmers we're working with, new clientele, to really make decisions. We feel when we pull them, we've got, upwards of 2 weeks to make an application to make a correction. So for me, that is one of the big caveats of it. And two, it's SAP is a little different. It's what's actually flowing in this island flow in the plant. So we get a look of what's consumptive or what's being drawn in a big way. And it's done some great things with Luke's ability with data. We've really been able to find critical drops and how those nutrient relationships work together between micros and macros. So it's really challenged us to put a new management strategy forward with it.
Being proactive with the SAP, why is it pro? I mean, he talked about being consumptive and everything, but is it just the information we can glean out of that being proactive?
The biggest probably thing I see when looking at the data versus like traditional tissue testing and how it's proactive is we can pick up on stresses and deficiencies before they become visible in the field. And so two examples from that, one from last year that turns out to be kind of completely different than this year, was that last year we hit a hot, dry spell in June. So we were able to actually see nitrogen flow, for instance, shut down. So that gave us a warning sign that we're going to possibly need to manage nitrogen a little bit different here, because we can see in the SAP dry soils, and then we don't see nitrogen flowing into the plant anymore. Now, a traditional leaf test in the past, we would have seen nitrogen there because we're looking at what's accumulated, not what's flowing on day one, day to day. Another example would be kind of a flip-flop of that this year was sulfur levels. And we had an extended period of cool weather through May. So we slowed mineralization down. Therefore, we saw sulfur, even though it was challenging to kind of think of, because we had applied sulfur and there was sulfur out there, but especially like say using elemental or a thiosulfate, something that has to be mineralized in order to get into the plant. Well, we don't have the mineralization power because our soil temps aren't quite there yet. Therefore, we see it drop and it becomes another issue we can try to manage around. And we see that in real time with SAP.
I think if we had a crystal ball, we shouldn't have put so much nitrogen on last fall. We've had such great mineralization with the, I would call pretty ideal soil moisture levels as a whole across the Corn Belt. So, great way to measure, but there's, like Luke said, a whole new set of challenges this year with assimilating nitrogen, getting nitrogen to go to a protein. So,
yeah, I think, considering this year, to your point, we were the same way here, dry last year. Really struggled nitrogen early on because of the weather. Now we're completely opposite this year with the weather we've got. And I just got a report we were just looking at before we got on the air here, and it's we're poking at each other that, well, your simulation sucks, So, but I think it is a good tool to kind of tell the story of the crop and make decisions off of.
To me, all testing in the ag world, whether it's soil testing or plant testing, it can cause you to beat your head against the wall sometimes. But the more you pull, and I'll let Luke allude to this, but the more data we get, we throw out the wild cards, right? We get more of a historical trend. So what I'm seeing from last year, our first really big year of SAP data collection, it really, for the most part, I felt followed our tissue SAP database that we had built for 5 years. However, this year, tissue never really showed what happens in a cloudy condition with great soil moisture, where we don't have that photosynthetic energy to the plant. I'm seeing slightly different trends than last year. So last year I seen the historical with when it was a little drier, potassium is a problem, sulfur is always a problem, micros are an issue. Well, this year I seems to be sulfur, phosphorus, potassium seems to be a little more dominant this year, but we've got almost perfect soil moisture, So for me, it allows me to still, react this season. And being we split apply in our area, we've shifted dollars around, to actually put what's lacking.
What do you feel like with tissues often overlooked versus what we can pick up in sap?
Probably one of the biggest things is the different forms of nitrogen. I would say is a big thing. A traditional tissue test just gives you a total nitrogen number, what's accumulated, not the different forms of nitrogen. So on a sap test, we have 3 metrics: total nitrogen, which is a metric for your total converted protein in, and ammonium and nitrate. So you can see each 3 components of nitrogen in the plant, and then build and see how they relate to other nutrients and get a more clear picture of what the biological system of the plant is doing in real time.
And why is that important? Why is the ammonium and nitrate important to know those 2 different numbers from like getting a traditional like total nitrogen number from like a tissue? I mean, I think that's a big distinction that we've learned.
Yeah, and it's something that we're very fortunate to work with some of these vegetable agronomists that up until 3 years ago, I don't think any one of us thought about nitrogen stabilization.
Yeah,
really think about nitrogen assimilation.
Totally. Yep.
So, now we look at that as an energy sink. When nitrogen isn't assimilated, it's taking energy to assimilate it once it's in the actual plant. We want that assimilation to happen in the root. So for me, it's changed how I look at when I apply nitrogen. Okay, well, I want to have some carbon down there. I want micros now in the soil. I want that to take place in the root zone. So it's changed our furrows a little bit. It's changed my base rate nitrogen a little bit. So for me, it's a whole new thing. And I understand now how precious the energy resource is. And I don't want that. I want to have maximum assimilation of nitrogen and that conversion to take that energy, draw.
Yep. Yeah. Well, those are good points. Kind of going to the next thing. And I think as Calibrate Ground, we talk a lot about it, dysfunctions. We kind of hit on it earlier, but how does SAP allow us to see those dysfunctions?
To me, it's huge, because what SAP's allowed us to do is to break apart wildly different management strategies. So long-term manure history versus synthetics. Well, when we go to all these soil health meetings, and a lot of farmers are right now, and it's the regen buzzword's a really big thing. We talk about the salts that are in a lot of our base rate fertilizers, and while they are negative, our excess sodium and chloride comes historically out of manure ground. And so we've kind of got a different management strategy under long-term manure history versus using more synthetic fertilizers. So for me, that's one distinction we've had is like, it's black and white. We need a slightly different management program for manure ground than we do synthetics. So that's been the big one. And the other big dysfunction I see is micronutrients. We're just always low.
Yeah. So over the last couple of years, and we like to take this data and put it into, an overall larger data set you can actually run some analysis on. And it is always an issue broad spectrum across the board. Depending on the management strategy, like Clint's talking about, it can be worse or better. And one good example, we have from our data set last year was one of our dealers in a high manure area. So overall, micronutrients trend low, and it's just a common issue in the Corn Belt. Part of it's environmental, a lot of it's our nitrogen fertilizer practices. We kind of over apply, not maybe really over apply, but get an imbalance. There's so much nitrogen there, we have to process it.
Is it safe to say we don't even think about micros?
We don't think about it. Now with SAP data, you can see it. So like with the example of the high manure group that we work with, we can see their issues processing and assimilating nitrogen, that we can go right and look at the micros and group those by an entire geographic region, and then compare it back to our wide geographic region to see, well, their micros are, say, 15, 20% lower than this other region. So it's showing you the real story. And when you actually start to correlate and see what moves together, the story is the same.
Mm.
So it follows the natural plant processes very well. It is one of the big things that I like about it. Once you start to learn it. And for growers, like on the data collection side, one thing, we talked about, don't just pull a sample here and there. In my opinion, if a guy wants to build and learn, it's better to pick out just a couple fields and do it over time. Less sampling sites, more frequent sampling. So that way you don't miss an event. And you can start to correlate that back to your weather and your environment, and to build the story out. Now, if you just go pull one sample one time from 20 fields, you're going to miss, the entire plant system and how it's functioning.
Yeah, we call that kind of the ebb and flow of that field per se. So, and I think that's one thing that SAP's allowed us to do is get a more resolute ebb and flow of the nutrient. Everybody sees the nutrient uptakes. A lot of universities pull them out. Even the seed dealerships use them and stuff. And I think there's some value. There is value to them. We use them. But I think SAP's allowed us to be a little more pinpoint, when you say, on those flows. I mean, just looking at our data set from last year, we know, take frost. Once it starts to be deficient, we never recovered. And before, we never really even looked at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the metrics we were using showed we was pretty much adequate in FOSS. So we allocated and went a different direction. So you're only as good as the data you're collecting. So I do feel that it is, while it's not acceptably validated or accepted by universities yet, it is the only test we've found that we can take the rapid soil test and actually calibrate it to SAP and over a large data set.
Mm-hmm.
And the other big thing with SAP that I think is super cool is we're pulling old and new leaf. And once we get to reproduction, we're pulling, and like I say, corn, we're pulling the ear leaf. But for that alone, and, on the mobile nutrients, NPK, mag, sulfur chloride, when those start to move from the lower part of the plant to support upper part of the plant, to Luke's point, we see that in the SAP before we ever visibly can see the deficiencies out on the field. So to me, that has been one of the biggest helps for me, is to learn those critical drops. And then we're trying to reposition our timing a little bit, because when we want to drive yield, the timing of the application is just as important as getting the right nutrients in the blend.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's, we talked critical drops, timing, things of SAP, and SAP's allowed us to do. And I think, and you guys can speak onto this, I think just the SAP, the information we glean from SAP has challenged us to be better agronomists, wouldn't you say? Would that be fair? Because you have to go, okay, my copper's low. Well, what's it do? Why do I need to have copper in there, and understand its functions in the plant? I think it's a great education tool to take the next step in your agronomic plan. Wouldn't you guys agree with what the information you glean out of it?
Oh, and it's been I'll speak for myself, but it's been a challenge. Sometimes we apply FOSS. Well, maybe we didn't move the needle. Well, maybe zinc is so dang low that it won't allow the FOSS to come in. Or same thing with potassium. Maybe the manganese is so low we can't actually regulate it. So, putting all those together and putting those pieces together has been a challenge and been kind of fun, and it definitely has made us better.
So moving on to, I'm a grower. Obviously, we talk about SAP a lot, and I think Luke, you hit on it. Maybe elaborate on it. That's the question I've gotten a lot, is well, how do I start? And maybe hit on a plan of like you said, just take one field and break it out and just do it weekly or bi-weekly, and what that means for a grower from a data perspective on his own farm, and being able to be more resolute in his data collection.
Yeah. So a good plan of attack, like I said, we don't focus on a ton of sites, just a couple of times you save through the season. Focus on maybe 2 or 3 fields, a good field, a poor field, and one in the middle. And then pull frequently, either every 2 weeks, every week, potentially. And also pull that rapid soil test along with it as a comparison. And then probably in maybe one or two of those fields, set up 2 sample sites where then you have one where you can go just, even if it's a 20-acre block, just learn from the tests and go apply a little bit of a product to say, let's say I am low on 3 micros, go apply them, and then go pull that sap sample again after you apply and compare it to where we didn't apply and see if we move the needle. And that's going to start to help you dial in your products that you want to use as well. So then you take what you learn from that small scale experiment, and then now we can take and broaden that out over the whole farm. And we don't necessarily need to be pulling every single field every week. Take what we learn in a few sites and then broaden out your perspective, what you learn there, and then do a more broad acre approach once you get a handle on what you're seeing and the products you're using are actually doing what they should do.
I agree. I mean, I think you should go hard early and almost be a detective and look for what's excessive, looks for what's your lowest rung of the barrel, and then put together a fall management strategy or a pre-plant all the way in season. And that's my goal is, as calibrated agronomy is to learn that rhythm and flow in different geographies under different weather environments. And I think it's, once you build the data on the front end, the agronomic decisions become much more clear and easy on the backside.
Those are great points that made me think of, just that question. What's your SAP data telling about your crop? And I think our case study is, and I think we've talked about it on some podcasts, and Scott's, a lot of people call us back and it's like, that makes sense. Is like just being able to see the herbicide treatment in the SAP data.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to, I want to talk about that a little bit of 1, what that showed, and then 2, how we've got products that we know through SAP data counteract that to help get through that. Suppose. I mean, you want to talk about just that specific critical drop there, Luke, and what we saw last year?
Yeah. So, last year we looked at this and we saw, especially in soybeans, and we all know that there's some stress put on when we spray, especially soybeans, post. Well, we could see that in the SAP data. You line up a big data set with a lot of different fields. So you're covering a lot of different and normalizing for a lot of different management strategy and practices. Mm-hmm. And then we see it in the SAP and we can go down the line. Okay, graph it out over time. These 4 or 5 things go down. Potassium seems to drop off. Phosphorus seems to drop off. Calcium seems to drop off. So now that we identified that issue, now let's go try to find a product to help with that. And so what we did last year, and this is, more on what we're doing behind the scenes with SAP more than to the grower, on how we use it to really deep dive and do some actual kind of data science with it, is our product ATP pump. We knew that it has a stimulatory effect. We just weren't sure what it would move. So you set up a replicated study, and we know how to do that. We know how to collect and normalize and get the data correct. Well, then it shows us that, hey, this product, not only does it stimulate the metabolism of the plant, but it increases calcium, potassium, and phosphorus, but it also puts a demand on micronutrients. So therefore we have a game plan now. So we've identified the critical drop. We've done our research using SAP to see how we can change it with this product. And then through that figured out that, hey, maybe we need a little bit of a helper along with it because we saw repeated micronutrient drops. So therefore there's your plan right there. ATP pump with some micronutrients. We identify the critical drop, identify the products that can have an effect on it, and now we can go deploy it. And I believe last year and this year, I think we're probably up to, over a 90% win rate with that product.
Yep.
And that's pretty unheard of, It's not very often you find something. And it's not that maybe the product it is a good product, but we did the work using the data in the
place it. Wouldn't that be right, Clint? Place it where to fix a dysfunction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and the one thing about it is the carbon and carbohydrates needed to sequester herbicide. The one thing that we get with SAP is the EC, the total nutrient flow. We get the total sugars and the bricks. Both of those dropped. Apply pump, sugars and bricks come up. So did the nutrients, it did the stimulatory effect. And I really think it just takes that burden, it's another energy burden of sequestering that chemical. So,
yeah, I think that's been like the biggest quote unquote win for we've seen the value out of it, is being able to calibrate those products as well with the SAP and prove some performance. I think we've talked about it earlier. It talks about a lot. We talk internally all the time is, yield ROI is a big deal, and it is, but you gotta have some other metrics, because I think sometimes I've had it happen to me in research I've done in the past is like you go through a product, you see a great physical response, especially beans. I think beans are a little more suspect to fluctuations. And then you go to, let's put it to yield. Well, you apply it like we are middle of June, and you're trying to get all the way to September. There's so many other factors to that point when you guys agree that influence that, but SAP allows us to validate performance in season. And there's some value to that.
Absolutely. You can show that a product actually did the work, and maybe there was a bigger stressor event later that canceled that out. So it allows me to take that second look at that product, right? Okay, well, it did something here. It's an effective tool. Just got to figure it out from there. So,
yeah, it wasn't the only reason yield got limited.
Yes.
Or it didn't work properly. And I think we've kind of hit on this one. We were joking before that this one gives us a little PTSD sometimes, but early warning signs from SAP analysis, and we've kind of hit on that. But I think you talked about one, and I think that's another unique thing that SAP helps us basically talk to the crop is the Brix, the EC, the pH, the sugars. Because a lot of times we get in talk and get a SAP back, and you're like, you got this expectation in your head. Like, oh, this should be really good. I applied this product, and then it comes back and it's a dud. And you're like, oh, great. Oh crap, what did I do? And then we'll get on the horn with each other and talk, and you're like, well, what's the sugars? Well, they're in the tank. Or what's this? I think having that metabolic look at the plant has been really another piece of the puzzle that we missed in the past, wouldn't you say?
It is. And where I've gotten a little frustrated sometimes with SAP is as we've gotten busier, I'm not in the field as much as I should be.
Yep.
And it's really important to be in the field because, last year we learned sometimes SAP, we had great balance, but the levels are maybe a little lower. When you get to talking to the interns and our team that's out sampling every day, it's like, well, these 3 fields are the best we got. So sometimes lower levels in SAP, as long as there's balance achieved, doesn't really scare me, like it used to, especially when the crop is needing tons of nutrition. So you want to build that baby up when it's small and you want to see high levels, but when that crop gets in rapid growth, it's okay to have that drawdown.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that balance of the plant and not necessarily being overloaded one way or the other. It's just sometimes it's just growing so fast that you're trying to keep up. The other early warning signs that we have seen is just from nutrient mobility. And I think that's one thing the industry don't talk a whole lot about is nutrient mobility and within the plant. And that's been one other eye-opening thing about what the SAP can tell you about your crop because of, like you said earlier, potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, being able to look at a new leaf and old leaf and get a scale of that plant or where it's going. How's that helped you guys make recommendations or help the grower make, understand what's going on?
Well, for me, it's been keeping the crop as healthy as possible for as long as possible. So, corn, soybeans, we want the plant to senesce. We want it to kill itself, but we want to prolong that. So we want to prolong the movement of nutrients from lower in the crop to support the upper part of the crop or the ear or the pod. So for me, I always look at it as I want to see that mobility, or I want to see the old growth and the new growth as even as possible for as long as possible. We know that that's going to mobilize, but the goal is with SAP to hold it longer. So, some of the vegetable guys we work with, made the comment they was able to hold their FOS numbers between new and old 8% better year over year. Well, 8% doesn't seem like that much. That equated to really big yield. So little movements in that, extending that is big.
Yeah, I think that's something that is really important to get across to people that aren't familiar with SAP and how it's different. It's the only leaf sampling method we've ever come across that is a differential analysis. So but what I mean by that is you are looking at that difference between the new and the old. Let's just take the mobile nutrients. If you just pull, traditional leaf takes, usually pull him out the top of the plant. Well, we know that we mobilize from the top to the bottom. So because you have a differential look, you see the deficiency happen before. And we have those metrics in the test when we get it back. And it's just the flip flop with immobile nutrients. We see higher old leaf values and new leaf values. Well, we can't mobilize it out of the old leaf, and we see them dropping in the new leaf. Well, we maybe have a root dysfunction or a dysfunction in the soil. Maybe it's environmental that is not allowing us to build the immobile nutrient as we grow the plant up. So by looking and doing the comparison analysis, we can get a much better idea of what's actually going on with how nutrients are flowing. And it's a lot better to go make product recommendations and to know when to apply and maybe spend some money and when not to.
Do you think a lot of people in the industry know or understand mobile nutrients?
I don't think so. Not
because I don't hear it talked about much.
Personally, I didn't know until 2 years ago.
No,
I did not. We just faced it. If we're going to go apply this program and then tissue sample and try to hit some numbers and hit those numbers and just move on. But I think that's the education piece that we've gotten, is that mobile nutrient piece, and I always like to bring that up because it's an education thing that a lot of growers don't understand yet or have been educated on. I know I was there until we started down this path.
I think one of the things we learned, through you and through Kelly's farm last year was you guys were moving helicopter passes up ahead of tassel because we'd seen the drop.
Yep.
And we was anticipating it. And the goal was to extend another 2.5 weeks of a higher nutrient level in the plant. And that's where the magic, I think, really happens as far as getting that end yield. It's putting that all together.
Yep. Last thing I kind of want to talk about was SAP data. And from a grower level, from their historical program you guys have ran over, you guys have been working with guys for 10 years, a pretty long history, and you've ran them through a lot of different things. I mean, what are the comments or where they're at with SAP versus what they've done in the past?
I would say overall, year one, I would say we had some mixed feelings about SAP. One, we was learning it, and learning the critical drops, didn't really have the data set to forward think with it and really how to utilize the technology. But now that we're more dialed in, all of our custom side dress blends that go out all over the Midwest, it's very much what the SAP says. Now we got dealers and farmers we're working with, is they're putting exactly what is the limiting factors. And I think that's cool. From an aspect, then we got, to last fall, had guys doing that and then doing it the way they've always done it. And the highest ROI, the highest yield gains out of our side dress programs is where we followed what the data showed. And so to me, that was the validation. Is that going to happen every time? Absolutely not. But it was a very, very much of a trend. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, for guys just getting started, your first year is going to be a learning experience, but that's why we're doing what we're doing also, is building the longer term trends using overall the big data set to find that. And a lot of times as we learn, we share that with the customer. So a lot like this year, a lot of times with the issues we've seen, and they seem to be widespread, we're looking at hundreds of these samples. So now, a new customer, it doesn't make any sense to them. It's like, what is going on here? It doesn't make any sense to them. It's like, well, we've got this big data set over here. We're seeing this stuff flying in from all over the place. It's like, your problems are similar. Don't feel like you did anything wrong, because everybody's got this problem this year.
Yeah.
And that's where we fit into the puzzle with the grower. The first year's a learning experience, and then, lean on what we're seeing and what we're learning, and we're continuing to try to build and get more good information out of all of this that we're collecting. It's a little bit of a scavenger hunt, just because environmental data, I've spent a lot of time working with data in that over the years, and it doesn't matter if it's agriculture or medicine or forestry. Environmental science data is noisy and it's tricky to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why we're trying to position ourselves as the experts in that. Because a grower shouldn't be intimidated just because that's just the nature of environmental science data. I could tell you stories over and over again about different fields in environmental science and how difficult it is to get really good insights from the data because you're dealing with so many variables. And that's just the nature of the beast. But that's what we try to set ourselves up as experts in that.
Because it's more figuring out the trends and and what we call the critical drops and things, and being able to get ahead of that and in season and for their next year plan. So I think that is important. Last thing I kind of want to cover with the SAP data, to your point too, Luke, is that the noise in the data, but finding those trends and being able to sort out the relationships in the data is just as important going down the road and all this.
100%. There's a lot of talks on the whole plant charge balance thing. And that's the whole thing I love about SAP. It shows you positive nutrients grouped, negative charge nutrients grouped, and we can look at the relationship. So that's when I look at a report today, I'm looking at the relationships. And so, lot to learn that you can find your excess and your weakest link and put that all together in a management strategy.
And I think that goes back to, we've highlighted this too. And I think antagonisms show up in SAP.
100%.
The competition between nutrients in that plant charge balance, you can almost, what is it, Luke? 90% of the time you can look at your rapid soil and that's what your SAP's going to be down the road. And I think that's the beauty of having that whole calibrated system in place to be able to understand what you're fighting against and how to go out there and compete against it, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we see it all the time.
Well, here a good real world example of that is we see this all common. This guy's using manure, great for fertility source. It brings them antagonisms along with it, mainly sodium, and we can see that in the SAP. So we'll see sodium start to load up in the SAP because all the manure has been applied over the years to the fields. Well, what's that doing? Well, it's outcompeting our potassium. So we may be on paper putting on a ton of potassium, but we see a suppression and we maybe don't see the increase like we thought we would because we are forcing sodium into the plant, taking its place. So, and that's something that's really unique to SAP that I think you can really only see in SAP. And that's a relationship and that's a real world example of that.
Because it's not the fact that you don't have enough potassium in the soil, right, Clint? I mean, your sodium's out competing your potassium and causing a dysfunction.
Yeah, that molecule is smaller. It can move faster. It can flood into the plant, and so it's a for us then it's how we use carbon to sequester and hold and bind and slow that sodium flow down to allow the other cations to flow in. Sometimes it's actually outcompeting it by applying the nutrients that it's antagonizing. So that's the kind of things we're being able to put together and with SAP actually validate, hey, big GABA backbone actually helped this issue. We didn't even apply any nutrition. So that's, to me, is what's been rewarding. So
yeah, that's good stuff. Luke Holst, Clint Frese, I'm Mike Evans. If you've got any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to us and we'll catch you on the next episode of Blueprint to Yield.